On Tuesday, August 3rd, the Ministry of Education released the official guidelines in regards to restrictions and protocols that all Ontario schools must follow as classrooms are expected to fully open this fall. The document outlines both elementary and secondary school protocols for in-person learning. Elementary schools are expected to keep their doors open 5 days per week with 300 minutes of instruction, separating students into small cohorts or groups. Students are allowed to interact with other cohorts in cafeterias and libraries with physical distancing and must encourage. As for secondary schools, daily in-person learning will resume for 5 hours of instruction, equivalent to a full school day. School boards have been instructed to place students in no more than 2 courses at a time. These precautionary measures will allow for an easier return to online learning if needed. Extracurricular activities such as inter-school sports and clubs are also expected to resume in September. However, remote learning will remain an option for parents and students who do not feel comfortable with in-person learning. Online learning will also be prepared in case of school closures. On Wednesday, August 4, Minister Stephen Lecce announced a plan to improve school ventilation systems for in-person learning. As the announcement was held in a classroom, Minister Lecce was asked why reporters were not permitted to attend on-site for the day's live announcement as a safety measure. Yet, students were expected to stand in the same classroom this fall. In response, this is what Minister Lecce had to say.
Where we're providing the school boards with the assurance and access to those HEPA filters to further improve air quality and to help keep these schools as safe as humanly possible. That is what we're doing today. And we're looking forward to September getting children back full-time in person, which will help support their mental and physical health, which we believe is so important as we look forward to getting them back.
As of now, only children aged 12 to 17 are permitted to receive a COVID-19 vaccine, although not mandatory, as some public health experts warn of a potential fourth wave where the Delta variant is prominent. Minister Lecce was asked why mandatory vaccination is not being implemented for a safer return to in-person learning. This is Minister Lecce's response.
The government has made a decision in the context of mandating vaccines, and we're not going to do that. We'll respect the choices individuals will make, but at the same time, we can be strong advocates for vaccines as a safe way to reduce risk and to allow for a more normal return to class and to be, quite frank, a more normal September and fall and beyond. Really trying to ensure that kids are as safe as possible for September. So we'll continue to urge everyone in this province to roll up their sleeve, get the vaccine. It is the best way by which we can put this pandemic in the rearview mirror, and while respecting the choices individuals will make.
In Toronto, Yolanda Aspiras, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Organizations representing Canada's doctors and nurses want mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations for the country's healthcare workers. Both the Canadian Medical Association and the Canadian Nurses Association say vaccinations should be a condition of employment in healthcare settings. As health providers, we have a fundamental duty of care towards our patients and the public, Medical Association President Dr. Ann Collins said. There's a significant evidence that vaccines are safe and effective, and as health professionals who are leading the vaccination campaigns, it is the right call and an appropriate step. Nurses Association Tim Guest echoes that view. Throughout this pandemic, healthcare workers have been on the front lines and were among the first to get vaccinated, Guest said. We need to maintain this trend and ensure that we take all the necessary steps to protect our patients and, of course, protect each other. The two groups say this move would keep both patients and workers safe from COVID outbreaks. With fewer cases, there will be less demand placed on the healthcare system by COVID patients. So far, the Canadian government has resisted any suggestions that vaccines be made mandatory. But health officials are concerned that demand for vaccinations is dropping off, particularly among young people. In Montreal, Stacey Del Campo will live in interesting times.
Hello everyone, I'm currently in Notre Dame Street in Montreal, Quebec, where they're filming the Transformers movie. From July until September, Transformers Rise of the Beasts will be filming across the island of Montreal under the working title E77. While there have been no celebrity sightings yet, Montrealers have spotted several vintage cars and New York City newsstand props that are being used on sets. The film's budget is expected to be near $200 million, which beats most budgets of films that have been shot in Montreal. Earlier this week, René Lévesque Boulevard was shut down late at night so the crews could begin filming scenes in the new film. It is expected to shut down again throughout the week, so watch out for any traffic jams or Optimus Primes that may come your way. Montreal is known to be a prime location for shooting major Hollywood films like The X-Men, The Day After Tomorrow, Catch Me If You Can, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and a lot more. In Montreal, Quebec, Marjorie Quintos, we live in interesting times.
A huge wildfire tearing through Northern California became the third largest in the state's history today and looks set to continue growing. Scary, intense. Evacuated Chester residents describe fleeing their home as the Dixie Fire continues to grow. Take a look.
It was scary. It was scary, especially going through all the construction that was on the road and seeing all of the official cars going in the opposite direction, just flying past us, and the buses. And it was scary.
Oh, it very intense. For quite a few nights, you could see the red coming over the hill, the glow of the fire. It was intense. It was a monster. It truly is.
It was all right. The sheriff's department was there, and they talked to me, and I told them everybody's out. We're getting ready to pull out, and the house is all locked up. And said thank you, and then they took off. So, I mean, I hated to leave, but when they have to literally tell you have to go, I guess it's time to go.
At 322,000 acres, the Dixie Fire is now the size of Los Angeles and the sixth largest fire in California history. Plumas County Sheriff Todd Johns, who is helping to coordinate the fight against the fire, said the destruction was devastating. And firefighters on a new threat. The growing river fire is burning in an area that hasn't seen flames in 100 years. A long-term drought that scientists say is driven by climate change has left the western U.S. parched and vulnerable to explosive and highly destructive fires. By late July, the number of acres burned in California was up more than 250% from 2020, itself the worst year of wildfires in the state's modern history. The Dixie Fire has evoked painful memories of the Paradise Fire, the deadliest blaze in California's recent history. Faulty power lines sparked that inferno, which swept through the northern town of Paradise in 2018, killing 86 people. Pacific Gas and Electric, California's largest energy utility firm, was deemed responsible. PGE equipment is again being blamed for this Dixie fire after a tree fell on a power conductor the day the blaze began. The utility announced in late July it will bury 10,000 miles of power lines in a massive bid to prevent its equipment from igniting more deadly wildfires. Bob Ward, the policy director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change at the London School of Economics, explained that the increase in wildfires currently raging across Europe and other regions are a consequence of climate change and that they will be more frequent and more intense for at least the next 30 years. Take a look.
The Earth is warming, and that means periods of hot weather are becoming more intense and more frequent, and that leads to faster evaporation of water, which dries out vegetation, increasing the risks of wildfire. And we're seeing wildfire seasons becoming longer and more intense all around the world. Wildfire is a natural part of renewal in forests, but what we're seeing are areas of forest burning much more than in the past, and we're seeing areas such as in Siberia now exposed to much longer periods when fire is a real risk, and that's going to increase. We see more northerly and more southerly areas, which we traditionally think of as being rather cold, burning more often. Summers are going to become increasingly risky for people, particularly anybody who's living near forested areas, and we need much stronger regulations to stop people building in areas that are prone to wildfires. Climate change is increasing the risk of wildfire, and the conditions are going to get worse for at least the next 30 years, because climate change will only stop when the world gets to net zero emissions of greenhouse gases, and the earliest date that countries are discussing is 2050. So we have 3 decades of worsening wildfire risk. People can see the damage that's being caused by extreme weather events, including wildfires, and I think that they recognize that it's here now, it's not some distant threat. That will mean that they are putting more pressure on governments to act more strongly.
Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeire warned that the highly infectious Delta variant will push cases in the country even higher. Take a look.
Yes po, Yusek Rocky, no? So nakikita na po nating sumisipa na ang mga kaso. Tumataas na po ang kaso, nararamdaman na po natin ang epekto ng Delta variant dito po sa ating bansa. At amin pong nakikita, based also on projections, natataas pa rin po ang mga kasong ito. Ito pong ginagawa natin ngayong paghihigpit ng mga quarantine restrictions or classifications ay ang ating adhikain dyan is to delay further increase, pero hindi niyan patitigilin. Tutuloy pa rin ang pagtaas, pero ang atin pong ginagawa ngayon is to prepare our system for this continuous increase in the number of cases. We had been hammering on the different response processes na ginagawa natin sa ngayon. We are now expanding beds in the different facilities across the country. Pinadadagdagan po natin ang mga ICU, pinapadecongest natin ang mga ospital dito sa mga mild at asymptomatic at ililipat po sila sa mga step-down facilities. Hindi naman po para tanggihan ng kahit na sinong pasyente sa ating mga ospital, i-redirect lang po sila. That's why we are asking local governments and also our hospital facilities to have a navigation system para po natin na i-refer sa appropriate facility ang ating mga pasyente at malaman ng mga pasyenteng mild and asymptomatic that they can also be taken care of in our lower facilities, hindi na kailangan sa mga matataas na ospital. Wala, katulad ng lagi naming sinasabi, Yusek Rocky, mula nung umpisa, bagamat hindi pa natin ma-officially declare na may community transmission sa ating bansa, we are now acting as if there is really community transmission. Dahil nakikita na ho natin yung epekto na mabilis na tumataas sa mga kaso. Nakikita rin po natin na hindi na lang po sa isang parte ng bansa, ngunit maraming parte na po ng bansa. So we are now actioning or giving actions as if there is already community transmission.
Meanwhile, nearly half of the total number of overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs in Hong Kong, has been vaccinated. That according to the Philippine Overseas Labor Office, or POLO, reporting this on Friday. Labor attaché Melchor Dizon said out of the 220,000 Filipinos working on the island, more than 100,000 have received the vaccine against COVID-19. Now, he also noted that Hong Kong has enough supplies of the COVID-19 jabs. At the same time, Dizon also reported that the government is giving incentives to those who will get vaccinated. He said for residents, they are giving away like a house, a car, a certain amount, but they have a draw that will start maybe next month for the raffle, where Filipinos are qualified to join the raffle, except for the house prize. The majority of Filipino workers in Hong Kong are household service workers.
In other news, Thai police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at hundreds of protesters in Bangkok, demanding political reform and calling for a change to the country's coronavirus vaccination program. Now, demonstrators defied restrictions on public gatherings introduced as Thailand battles its worst outbreak of the virus, call for Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to quit. The Thai government has come under fire for the sluggish rollout of its COVID-19 vaccination program. The protesters also demanded it start using mRNA shots such as Pfizer and Moderna rather than China's Sinovac. The 500 or so protesters were vastly outnumbered by police, who said Friday they planned to deploy nearly 6,000 officers to tackle the rally. A youth-led street protest movement for democracy rose up last year and at its peak drew tens of thousands to rallies in Bangkok. Now, the demonstrators called for the resignation of Prayut, the former army chief who came to power in a 2014 coup, as well as changes to the military-scripted constitution. But the most shocking calls were for changes to the monarchy, a long-revered institution in Thailand protected by some of the world's toughest lèse-majesté laws.
Staying in Thailand, the morgue workers there are battling exhaustion as the kingdom's latest COVID-19 wave hits new highs and the death toll mounts. At Thammasat University Hospital, north of Bangkok, staff have had to rent a special container to store the bodies after the morgue filled up. Take a look.
คือมันอาจจะไม่ใช่ด่านหน้าที่แบบจะต้องเจอคนไข้ที่ยังมีชีวิตแต่เราคือด่านสุดท้ายแล้วครับคือเราต้องช่วยเหลือเขาอะครับศพมันจะมีทั้งศพด้านข้างในกับข้างนอกเข้ามาเพราะฉะนั้นมันทำให้ปริมาณศพที่จะเก็บในตู้เย็นนะค่อนข้างล้นแล้วก็ทำให้มีคอนเทนเนอร์ขึ้นมาศพที่เข้ามาเป็นศพที่มีความเสี่ยงนะคะเราก็จะทำการสวอปก็คือเพื่อตรวจหาเชื้อโควิดก่อนนะคะซึ่งโดยปกติที่ตรวจจะใช้เวลาประมาณ1 วันนะคะถึงจะทราบผลเนี่ยศพที่ตรวจส่งไปเนี่ยเราก็จะเก็บเอาไว้ก่อน
Now, the government has imposed severe curbs on daily life in dozens of provinces, including Bangkok, as it battles to contain the outbreak fueled by the highly contagious Delta variant of the virus. Bars, swimming pools, museums, and other public venues have been closed. Strict limits placed on shopping malls and restaurants, and a 7-hour nighttime curfew imposed. But so far, the measures have not slowed the spread, with 20,920 new cases announced on Thursday, taking the total since the start of the pandemic to almost 700,000.
In other news, Australia's 3 largest cities were in lockdown as New South Wales recorded 319 community cases of the virus and 5 more deaths, a third straight day of record case numbers. The leader of Melbourne's Victoria State, Daniel Andrews, comments on the current coronavirus outbreak. Take a look.
Very, very significant to see this many cases, although they are all linked, but they are linked to 2 outbreaks, and we don't know where those 2 outbreaks started. So there are mystery cases that sit behind this. The cases we've found since are linked to others that we knew, but they've been out in the community, and there's every reason. In fact, there is a certainty that there are more cases out there. That's why getting tested when you've got any symptoms at all is so important. If we don't follow these rules, then we will, through our own choices, we will drive cases up. That's not what we want. That's not how we get through this and get open again. It's in fact how we, if we make bad choices, the wrong choices, it's how we all play a part in keeping the place closed. We don't want that. So please, I know everyone wants to visit loved ones and friends and family in their homes. You just can't do that. You just cannot do that. This Delta variant spreads so fast. We look up in Sydney today, 5 people who have lost their lives. I think some of those are in their 60s. You know, we saw just this week a gentleman in his 20s. You know, this will go where the vaccine isn't. We don't have enough people vaccinated. We'll finish up with younger people in hospital, otherwise fit and healthy people. Our system will be overrun if we don't bring this under control.
A lack of supply and pockets of vaccine hesitancy has throttled efforts to immunize Australians, with just over 20% of the population fully vaccinated. The nation managed to avoid the worst of the pandemic for the past 18 months, but the effectiveness of its COVID-0 policy had been called into question as lockdowns struggled to stamp out the highly infectious Delta variant.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced. Eagle News, because we live in interesting times.
Welcome back. 9 people were wounded, one of them seriously on Friday in a stabbing attack on a commuter train in Tokyo, with the suspect later handing himself in after fleeing the scene, according to local media. The stabbings took place on an evening train in Setagaya Ward in the west of the city. One woman in her 20s sustained serious back injuries, according to public broadcaster NHK, citing emergency response officials. The site is several kilometers from the venue of the Olympic equestrian events. The train was brought to an emergency stop after the rail operator was alerted, and a knife and mobile phone believed to belong to the suspect were found on board. The male suspect, also in his 20s, was reportedly taken in by police after he turned himself in at a nearby convenience store, telling the manager he was the perpetrator of the attack. Violent crime is rare in Japan, and the attack comes with the capital on heightened alert as it hosts the Olympic Games. Japan has strict gun laws, but there are occasional violent crimes involving other weapons. In 2019, a man killed 2 people, including a schoolgirl, and wounded more than a dozen in a rampage that targeted children as they waited for a bus. In 2018, a man was arrested in central Japan after stabbing 1 person to death and injuring 2 others aboard a bullet train.
In Afghanistan now, where the Taliban have captured their second provincial capital in a fast-moving offensive. They captured Shevargan City in Jowzjan, and the deputy governor said that the second provincial capital to fall to the insurgents in less than 24 hours. A UN special envoy demanded the Taliban end its assaults. Take a look.
Afghanistan is now at a dangerous turning point. Ahead lies either a genuine peace negotiation or a tragically intertwined set of crises. An increasingly brutal conflict combined with an acute humanitarian situation and multiplying human rights abuses.
We informed the Council about grave human rights violations in Afghanistan happening. We see the Taliban in area they're capturing, their summary killings, executions, as well as chopping of hands, stoning to death, and very egregious, the graphic of which would be very difficult to even show here to the media.
The U.S. envoy spoke from Kabul, where the Taliban assassinated the Afghan government's immediate chief. Insurgents entered Zaranj, a city of 50,000 people in Nimruz province. Fierce fighting also continued in the capital of Helmand province. Fighting in Afghanistan's long-running conflict has intensified since May, when foreign forces began the final stage of a withdrawal due to be completed later this month.
The World Food Programme, or WFP, warned that it is facing a 70% funding shortfall in Myanmar, where millions face growing food insecurity. Take a look.
The people of Myanmar are going through their most difficult time in memory. They've been faced with multiple challenges, multiple shocks. First of all, poverty. Of course, poverty predated the current situation, and then, of course, since the 1 February military takeover, there's been increased political unrest, as also an economic crisis. COVID-19, we had a very tough second wave last year, which had a devastating impact on people's livelihoods, and now the third wave it's practically like a tsunami that's hit this country. It's hitting all aspects and creating major havoc. The WFP has tried to launch a large-scale assistance to people who we believe are in very high need. In critical need in urban areas, in the poorest parts of the urban. And we started in Yangon, and we've assisted approximately 750,000 people so far. But we believe that about 2 million people should be targeted with emergency food assistance. And really, to really sum it up, we do need the support and attention of the international community now more than ever.
In April, the UN agency estimated that the number of people facing hunger could more than double to 6.2 million in the next 6 months, up from 2.8 million prior to February. Subsequent monitoring surveys carried out by WFP have shown that since February, more and more families are being pushed to the edge, struggling to put even the most basic food on the table. WFP says a major wave of COVID infections is surging through Myanmar, compounding hunger, rising food and fuel prices, political unrest, violence, and displacement. Myanmar has been in chaos and its economy paralyzed since the military seized power from civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi on February 1.
The UK has launched an insurance scheme to cover music festivals and other live events as the beleaguered sector seeks protection after months of mass cancellations due to the coronavirus pandemic. The scheme, worth £750 million or $1 billion, and announced by the country's finance ministry late Thursday, follows pressure from organizers and venues for the government to provide a cushion from COVID uncertainty. The Live Events Reinsurance Scheme, created in partnership with UK-based Lloyd's Insurance Company, will run from September 2021 until the end of September 2022 to avoid a third summer of cancellations at events such as music festivals. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak admitted while organizers are eager to go following the lifting of most major restrictions, the lack of the right kind of insurance is proving a problem. As the economy reopens, I want to do everything I can to help events providers and small businesses plan with confidence right through to next year, he added. Jamie Njoku Goodwin, Chief Executive of the industry organization UK Music, said he had warned the government of the catastrophic impact of the market failure in insurance for live events. This new government scheme is therefore incredibly welcome news, not just for the millions of music fans who have been looking forward to the return of live events, but also for the tens of thousands of musicians and crew members, he added. While England removed virtually all coronavirus restrictions last month, most major festivals were forced to cancel or reduce crowd sizes well in advance because of the long lead times required for the large events. The Glastonbury Festival, held on a dairy farm in Somerset, southwest England, announced it would cancel for the second year in a row, as the third lockdown began in January. The festival live-streamed a concert to fans in May instead. Other festivals directly cited the lack of a government insurance scheme as they had to refund tickets during the emergence of a new, more transmissible Delta variant of the virus. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I am Nicole Salenga. We live in interesting times.
And to the U.S., a greater number of American children are being swept up in a wave of coronavirus infections driven by the Delta variant, causing renewed anxiety for parents and a bitter political fight as schools prepare to reopen within weeks. Much of the surge is concentrated in the southeastern state of Florida, where some school districts are defying an order by the Republican governor forbidding mask mandates. In the latest political twist in the health crisis, take a look.
I'm 12. With this thing, it's crazy with COVID. And since now they got the vaccine, it's getting a bit better.
You can't tell someone that, hey, like, don't go to school right now because of COVID. Like, that's not really ideal. But at the same time, like, if you do choose to go to school, you're going to be paying all this money in tuition to not have the same experience, you know? You're getting a lot taken away from you. And it's not the school's fault, it's just the reality of the times we're in. So it's hard, it's very hard.
The majority of children who catch the coronavirus will have a mild or asymptomatic disease, and until recently, they had not been a major focal point of the pandemic. That's now changing with Delta, a variant that is as contagious as chickenpox and largely drove 72,000 pediatric cases in the week leading up to July 29, according to a new study by the American Academy of Pediatrics, a figure 5 times higher than in late June. Nearly 20,000 of those cases were in Florida, according to state data. The Sunshine State is also experiencing the highest number of hospitalizations for minors in the country, currently 143, which is ahead of Texas.
Meanwhile, protesters took to the streets across France for the fourth weekend in a row to rally against a new health pass needed to enter a cafe or travel on an intercity train 2 days before the new rules come into force. The new rules, championed by President Emmanuel Macron, make it obligatory to have either a full course of vaccination against COVID-19, be in possession of a negative test, or be recently recovered from the virus to enjoy usually routine activities. Macron, who faces re-election next year, hopes the new rules will encourage all French to be vaccinated against COVID-19 and defeat the virus and its fast-spreading Delta variant. But opponents who have turned out en masse in the streets in the past weeks argue that the rules encroach on civil liberties in a country where individual freedom is prized. The pass has already been required since July 21st to visit cultural venues such as cinemas, theaters, and museums. Its extension was approved by France's Constitutional Council on Thursday.
In other news, NASA's Perseverance drilled into the surface of Mars but failed in its initial attempt to collect rock samples that would be picked up by future missions for analysis by scientists on Earth. The U.S. Space Agency published images on Friday of a small mound with a hole in its center next to the rover, the first ever dug into the red planet by a robot. But data sent to Earth by the rover after its first attempt to collect a sample and seal it in a tube indicated no rock had been gathered. Thomas Zurbuchen, Associate Administrator for NASA's Science Mission Directorate, in a statement said, quote, "I am confident we have the right team working on this, and we will persevere toward a solution to ensure future success," unquote. Scientists also hope to better understand Martian geology. The mission took off from Florida a little over a year ago, and Perseverance, which is the size of a large family car, landed on February 18 in the Jezero crater. Scientists believe the crater contained a deep lake where the conditions may have been able to support extraterrestrial life.